and welcome, and thank you very much for showing up on this beautiful Pulaski County evening. Appreciate your being here. My name is John Baucom. I'm president here of the Friends of the Panhandle Pathway, and we welcome each and every one of you to be here tonight. This is the dedication of the prairie grass section out here, and I want to thank Kathy and her committee for putting this together this evening. This is just great. We appreciate all the hard work that you've done on this. The trail, thank you, Kathy. The trail is a wonderful asset for our community, and it's starting to grow and to blossom into other things from that, and this prairie grass section is just one very fine example. And it just shows what you can do when you've got a lot of good friends of the Panhandle Pathway coming together. And Kathy's committee is just one example of that. Tonight, to kick things off, we've got Tom Post, our regional DNR ecologist, coming up, and he's going to give you a little bit of history to this effort. So, Tom, come on up.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the cookies, because I really like the cookies. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see that your organization, the Panhandle Pathway, is taking an interest in the natural resources along the trail. You have a lot of valuable things that you can watch and observe, and it's a real treasure that you have here along your trail as well. So your trail is truly multi-use. People can bike on it, and yes, I have biked on the pathway. People can walk on it, which I assume they do, John. Is that allowed?
Yes.
Okay. And as they do both of those activities, they can enjoy the natural resources that they see along the trail. Everything from the river and the creeks that you pass over, to the trees, to the prairie area that we're going to be talking about tonight. Kathy asked me to talk a little bit about the how and why we arrived at this dedication. That could be a long story, but I'll shorten it down for a few minutes that Kathy said I could have to talk tonight. Basically, the prairie is here because of the railroad, and your trail is here because of the railroad. Originally, when they laid the railroad out, not everything was farmed at that time. A lot of the land was still in prairie, and a lot of the prairie still existed in the right-of-ways as they laid the trail out, or the railroad out, going on like that. This is not the only example of prairies along a railroad, but it is one of the few that I know of that the group is actually taking an active interest in preserving it and maintaining it. So back to the 1860s, that's basically when this started, when the railroad was laid out through this area and this part. One of the other benefits from the railroads was that they were steam engines. And steam engines threw out a lot of sparks, and they caught the prairies on fire, and they kept them and maintained them as prairies. Some of the sections of the trail have turned into trees and shrubs. And one of the things we use to maintain our prairies is fire. Okay? So 1860s, that's about the first reference. Then we jump ahead to about the 1920s and the 1930s. And we have records in our DNR files of Indiana botanists. One was Charles Deem and the other was Robert Friesner. And they made collections of prairie plants along this railroad and in the vicinity. So we knew that there was prairie here based on their collections. So that's the 1920s. That's almost 100 years ago that we're talking about. The first collections we see are from about 1920. And that's only a few years after the automobiles started. But that gives you a perspective on how far back we're talking about the prairies and what's going on here. Fast forward to about the 1980s, 1980, 1981. We knew that we could find prairies along the railroads, and we could find prairies in the little settler cemeteries that were out there. So we decided to do an inventory for these prairie segments along the railroads. And back at that time, it was still an active railroad line. So we have records from 1981 where my division supervisor was actually out here and made a record that this was a nice example of prairie. So that's 1981. So we go from 1860 to 1920s to 1981. Railroads were not always the easiest companies to work with, as you probably found out in setting up your trail system. So we knew the prairie was here, but we were not having any good efforts to protect it in the Department of Natural Resources. 1981 is about 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, we already knew about it, but nothing got done. Fast forward to about the year 2010, when I got a call to come out and look at your trail system. They were grading it. They had not put any asphalt down yet. I don't even remember exactly why I was called out here to look at this. And so I looked at it and I said, oh, by the way, what's the group? What are they doing? What do they want to do? Do you think they might have an interest in the natural resources along the railroad corridor, which should now be your pathway? And one thing led to another, and I got hooked up with Kathy. And I've come to several of your meetings to discuss the prairie and its significance for you out there. And it's thanks to you folks now that this segment is going to be hopefully protected for another 100 years or more. I'm not going to be around, but some of you might be. Some of those little ones might be around back there to take care of it. So this small area that you have back here, this is, what is it, about 3 or 4 acres, Kathy, that we figured out? About 3.5 acres. Still has a number of the prairie grasses and wildflowers that the settlers knew about when they came here. They saw them. They were common to them. Today they're rare. We drive around the countryside, we see a lot of corn, bean fields, we see some woodlots, but we don't see very much prairie at all. So I'm very happy that the folks here decided to protect this kind of area. And it's a living resource. It's a living portrait of the prairie, and I thank you for dedicating it and watching over it for the Department of Natural Resources. So that's a little bit about the background.
Panhandle Pathway, we're very much pleased to have this 3.5 acre portion out here for everyone to enjoy. And today, this event, we would like to dedicate this section to the community, to the area, and to anyone passing through here to enjoy the Panhandle Pathway. Thank you very much. Kathy?
I might add that Max and his friends from Royal Center have decided to put in a butterfly bed at the Royal Center trailhead, and he's working on that now. And for anybody who might be interested on their own part, there is a Monarch Way Station program available to anybody who would like to start their own personal program. These plants are beneficial for our butterflies, especially for the monarch. We saw very few this year, and we'd love to see them come back in numbers. So if you can plant a milkweed, you're benefiting the monarch's future. Thank you for all coming.
Thank you very much.
I charge for my picture being